What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and I am joined by, well, if they were in the WWE, they'd be the M&M tag team. It's Mike and Megan are joining me again to don the cape and cowl, rubber nipples, and latex pants, whatever it is that Joel Schumacher wants to clad his Bat figures in. We are continuing the Batman retrospective. First and foremost, guys, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know I put you through Batman 66, but I feel that with Batman and Robin being in this little arch, it's kind of worse. So I will apologise up front.
Yeah, it is definitely. At least Batman 66 kind of knows how silly it is, so you can laugh with them rather than from a distance.
Yeah. I'm never entirely sure if, like, you know, Clooney or Arnie or ever completely know what film they're in. But this episode we've got three more films we're going to cover. We are going to cover Mask of the Phantasm, which was obviously an extension of the Bruce Timm universe animated series, Batman Forever from 1995, and Batman and Robin from 1997. So just before we get into the really good stuff, which we'll get into the Nolanverse at some point, you know, in the future, but those three. So just before we get into the film by film, and Megan, especially for you, because I know that your exposure to these is minimal, really. What are your overall thoughts of what I've just put you through?
I got bored a lot. Is what happened. What's it called? Mask of the Phantasm. I thought it was all right. I didn't hate that one. I did think it dragged a little bit, but I did enjoy it. And then what was the other one called?
It was Forever.
Batman Forever.
Which was one with Tommy Lee Jones in.
Oh yeah, that film annoyed me. I just found that the joke. No, it wasn't even the Joker. That's the problem. So Two-Face and the Riddler were just trying to out crazy each other for the majority of the film, and I didn't really understand Two-Face's character because he's not supposed to be like split personality, and he just seemed to be playing as the Joker. And then Batman and Robin sucked.
Yeah.
I hate it.
We finished that earlier.
We finished it like all of 45 minutes ago.
It took me a couple of attempts, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It's hard watching. I can't. It's one of those films where I loathe that film. I really hate it. I think there's so much wrong with it. But yeah, like 20 minutes in, and I'm like, I can't do this. I need to stop. I need to break this up.
Yeah, it got to half an hour, and I was just like, there's still an hour and a half of this film left, and I don't understand how it's only been half an hour.
We paused it at dinner, didn't we? And then paused it, and you were like, you looked at you like, is this only halfway through? And I was like, yeah.
It is one of those films. I think the same with Batman Forever as well. When you look at the runtime and you're like, these films are just over 2 hours. The credit scenes must be incredibly long because I can't see how the story lasts 2 hours.
Yeah, I thought Batman Forever dragged as well.
They both get to that point at about an hour 15, and you're like, okay, I'm ready for this to sort of wrap up. And then it's like, and the third act. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in Batman Forever, no, don't worry, ignore me. I'm getting it confused.
With the Keaton
I was getting it confused with the Mask of the Phantasm because I found the same thing happened there. Because I mean, the Joker didn't turn up until like really, really far into it, and I was like, "Oh,
it does take a while.
Okay."
I enjoyed Mask of Phantasm, but I did think it took a little while to kind of really get into things.
Yeah. Well, let's get into Mask of the Phantasm actually, because we'll save our Schumacher love for when we get to those. But Mask of the Phantasm, 1993. Batman voiced by Kevin Conroy, Joker voiced by Mark Hamill. They're really the only two worth of note, to be honest. Created and directed by Bruce Timm. and an extension of the Batman, the animated series that came out 2 years before this, 1991. And have you ever seen any of the animated series or?
I'd seen bits of them when I was younger because my brother used to watch them, but I can't remember them well enough. I remember seeing the animation for it. So I was born in Italy. So I don't know if it's a program that my brother watched when we were living in Italy or whether we were living in England, is how hazy it is. But I definitely have seen bits of it.
Yeah, I'm more or less the same. I've probably seen more than you. I had that period of time in my life when I was younger where I would watch all of the animated shows on places like Cartoon Network and all that sort of spanning area. And there was always, I think it was like Toonatics or something like that, where it would play like Dragon Ball Z, and then the sort of more quite darker in a quite sort of cartoons, that sort of thing. So I remember that, and X-Men the animated series, and like I think the Spider-Man one as well.
Yes.
All those sort of 19 eras cartoons I've seen.
Biker Men from Mars was another one.
Biker Mice from Mars. I used to love that.
Biker Mice from Mars.
Yeah. So I've seen bits and pieces of the animated series, but I've seen the Mark Hamill Joker a few times, but I haven't seen any episodes I could really note specifically.
Okay, yeah, because it's interesting because it's sort of for a generation, my generation, sort of like 10 years older than you guys, really, I suppose. It sort of forms that sort of entry point because you'd had like Batman '89, and then you sort of had you were waiting, and you knew that sort of Batman Returns was coming, and then all of a sudden they give you this animated show. So it came in, I think, late '91, early '92. It came about, and it was just very, very different. It maintained this sort of more serious tone for Batman. The animation I love the animation style for it, and it was just so different. And as you say, sort of like you'd had like the X-Men animated series and Spider-Man, or there's a Fantastic Four one, and all those. And so for me, so I actually went to see this in the cinema.
Oh, really? Mask of the Phantasm?
Yeah, Mask of the Phantasm had a sort of a limited cinema release. A bit like you, even probably before you were born, but like Transformers the movie in '86 had like was their sort of like venture into the sort of theatrics. This was the same thing. It was sort of like, well, we've got a bit more time before the next Batman film comes out, which is Batman Forever. So let's put it in cinema. We'll do something, because this could have easily been, when you watch it back now, this could have easily been like a two-parter in a series.
Yeah. And interesting, was that, because obviously I know it comes after the animated series, but is it the final thing, or is there more movies or more content for the animated series after this?
No. And to be honest, there's very little sort of like canon, as it were, for the animated series. It was very much sort of designed to be, any episode can be entry point. I mean, there's some two-parters. Ironically enough, Two-Face gets the first two-parter, I believe.
No.
And so you could watch those, but they were designed for you really to be like one and done. Okay, this week Batman's up against Man-Bat, or this week is up against the Joker, or Killer Croc, or whoever. And there was very little sort of like, all right, well, I'm watching one from season 3. Do I have to go back and watch all of season 2 first? You're like, no, not really.
Fair enough.
It was before animation got to that point of, I think Clone Wars is really one of the first things that ever did that. Where it introduced things into a canon where you're like, well, you really have to have watched this to understand this, and to move on to that. This isn't that really. The one thing this does do, which was unusual, and sort of like, obviously we watched Batman '89. That gave the Joker an origin, and so did this. And I'd sort of slightly forgotten that, because it's been a little while since I watched Mask of the Phantasm. So for it to give Joker an origin story again was unusual. I didn't realise that. But yeah, I have to admit, I really enjoyed this. Kevin Conroy is like, they sort of, especially for you, Mike, when you're reading the sort of the Star Wars comics and stuff, I assume that when certain characters you read and you hear that voice.
Yeah.
For me, whenever I read Batman, any Batman thing, like Kevin Conroy's voice as this 90s Batman is what I hear. And obviously he came through, did all the Dark Knight, the Arkham Asylum games and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah. Because I think Mark Hamill did the Joker for those games as well.
He did.
Yeah, because I've played Asylum and City.
Yeah. So yeah, from a story point of view, as you say, sort of the story is quite a simple story. Batman is implicated in the murder of a series of mob bosses, but what we find out is it isn't him. It's a character called the Phantasm, a new vigilante that's come to Gotham, and he's on a reign of vengeance. I'm going to spoil it. Spoilers for all these reviews. It's a 30-year-old animated film. We find out that the Phantasm is, in fact, a past lover of Bruce Wayne, who has come back to take vengeance for the death of her father and his involvement in the mob. And it sort of then ties in the Joker, because I think they realised that we needed a Batman villain to appear in it.
Yeah, it got halfway through it and you're like...
That's why it's so late. The funny thing is that I was like... Because when we were trying to find, when we were getting the movie up to watch it, it came up with Mark Hamill's name as the Joker. So I knew that the Joker was going to be in it because it was associated with the film. Yeah. And it was funny because I was like, isn't the Joker in this film? Like, he was like, I don't know. And then I was like, I'm pretty sure he is, because it said it on the internet. And then literally like 2 seconds after that, the Joker appeared, and I was like, I predicted it. But it's surprising that he hasn't been in this film yet, because this is quite far into it.
Yeah, because I knew he appeared in the animated series and whatnot, and I knew Mark Hamill was a Joker quite a lot, but I didn't spot Mark Hamill's name being in it, and I specifically didn't look anything up to do with this. And this is the main one I was going in blind. I have seen Forever and Batman and Robin at some point in my life, but I'd never seen Mask of the Phantasm. When we watched it, I was pretty certain to you, I think I said that I think this is like at some part of the animated series. I thought it was near at the end or something.
Yeah.
Because I recognised the Joker Hamill, but yeah, it is. I did enjoy it. I will say I did enjoy the film, but you can feel the age. There's certain parts where you can feel the age of it. But one small thing I really liked is whenever Batman hits someone, it gets a flash of white. I like that little effect. It's just, you feel the punch. They're the really cool sounding punch as well, rather than you go earlier than that and you hear the sort of, I always laugh at them. I think they're in the Batman 89 and stuff, where it's more of a whap noise, where it's like when someone hits someone, that had a really satisfying
to be fair, noise. Some of the punches were really good. There's one distinct one that he punches it and then his face kind of goes in a bit and then he gets pushed back. That was a good punch.
He dies like, he's launched.
Oh yeah, it's the one where when he jumps off of the motorbike or something. He's like, the guy's on the motorbike and he punches him off the bike.
Yes. You mean young Bruce Wayne? Yeah.
When the girl's watching from the bridge. Yeah. That's the thing I like about this animation is it's sort of, it leans into sort of like, I always consider this sort of they took things from what I think Japan was doing. They sort of looked at Japan versus sort of American animation. We're like, why is it theirs is better than ours? and they learned from it. And I do feel I always feel because of the designs as well. Like, everyone's quite blocky. It's very, I just love everything feels quite meaty in this. Like, everyone's sort of like barrel chested and sort of like,
Bat was like a giant triangle, isn't he? His shoulders are gigantic. They're like wider than
it's like
anything.
Johnny Bravo.
You said it was like Johnny Bravo animation. Yeah, it is. I agree with you there as well. I do really like when Batman's got his cloak on and it's just basically just the black rectangle and nothing else. And I like that the darkness you get shines of blue. Is when you can see things in the dark. I like that. I did like the look and the feel of it. Yeah, it was nice. You could feel it was 90s, but as you say, with the sort of the influence, because I've seen not a huge amount of anime, but I've seen a fair amount, and there were certain characters' faces. Well, I think more so in the flashbacks. And what's that guy?
It was the mobsters,
the douchebag guy who was
the
trying
guy
to
with
get with Andrea.
The greasy hair,
Beaumont.
the one that worked for Mr. Beaumont.
Yeah, him. He was the one. He looked quite anime-ish. His sort of face reminded me of
that. I was gonna say features and everything. Yeah, they can definitely tell there was some inspiration. One of the things from the animation that's interesting is up until this point, all animation, paintings and drawings and backgrounds were all done on a white background. So you started with white paper and built it from there. Batman the Animated Series was all animated on black.
Oh.
So they start with black and then they add colour and context and lighting to that. So that's where you get this very distinctive look and feel. And one of the things they tried to do is when they did the Superman series, so the Bruce Timm-verse expanded, like that was then went back to the white animated back because it looks lighter, it's brighter because that's Metropolis. And then whenever they reintroduced Gotham, they'd go back to this style.
Wow.
So that's where you get like a chalkiness to it as well. So it sort of has that sort of pastel sort of chalkiness sort of to the dark and stuff. So yeah. But I like what you're saying about the dark character. I mean, there's a scene in this which, when you think about it, it's a little silly, but I like it. Is when he first dons the cape and cowl, and Alfred's reaction.
Oh yeah,
is a bit like you probably wouldn't react like that, but
it's like
yeah. But I like the fact that they give it that thing of like actually he's found he's become the Batman, and that sort of thing. But you've obviously met in the previous films Michael Gough, and we'll go back to Michael Gough as Alfred, and then we had. I forget the guy's name, but the tall sort of mustachio dude from the 60s. What were your thoughts about this version of Alfred?
Alfred just wants him to find love. He just wants him to be happy.
Yeah.
I think he's a good Alfred. He matches, because the Alfred, I find that most of the Alfreds that I've seen do marry up quite well. Because I've seen 5 seasons of Gotham as well. So there's there's the Michael Caine Batman from the Nolanverse, and then also I do also like the Justice League and Batman vs Superman Alfred as well. They're all slightly different iterations, but I feel like there's not really a bad Alfred in my view that I've seen. I think this one is a really good one. I liked it when there's little clever things I like in animation to show time, and I like how when it was a flashback, Alfred just had black hair, and when it was a non-current time, he specifically had white hair. I did like that, and the little comedic moment where he walks in with him and Andrea with the tray,
and they're making out, and then he just backs out.
Yeah, does it again like
both times.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah.
Did you think it about Alfred as well?
He was all right.
He was all right, Alfred.
I actually like this because I think again there's a sort of a sardonic humour to this sort of Alfred, and it plays out quite well. I mean, there's a bit when they're talking about his first encounter or the first reportings of the Phantasm, and he says like, "Oh, this guy's this guy's clearly out for something. He's clearly crazy or something like that." And Alfred's like, "Of course, sir. I shall go wash your tights and cape." And said, "Yeah, all right. Well, you're clearly all there." And yeah, so I do like the fact he's able to prod, and they've got like a relationship that's clearly sort of very comfortable, very secure. It is like sort of like almost like father and son, but he's able to poke fun at Bruce in that way, which I think is quite cool.
And I think that Alfred does it in the 4 sort of Burtonverse films as well. He's got that sort of like, I don't think that, from what I can recall, I'm pretty certain Michael Caine is almost more of an emotional Alfred.
Yes, yeah.
yeah, exactly. He's more of an emotional one, whereas the one from the Burtonverse and this one are both the sort of making sort of fun of it, kind of being, he's like, Bruce is doing this really silly thing, but it's what he wants to do, and it kind of makes sense. So I have to just go along with it, but I'm not going to not be sassy. It's that sort of.
I love that sassy. That's exactly what he is. It is. It's almost like he's sort of accepted his lot, hasn't he? He's like, well, it's clear that Bruce is nuts, but it's in a good way, so I'm going to have to let it die for now.
Yeah.
What about having the sort of the parallel storylines? Because it's because again, like this came out in '93. It was never touted as a big animated film. It was just a sort of, we're doing this. But I always think that like the storytelling in this is actually relatively sophisticated for a kid's cartoon that they were going to stick in the cinemas. This idea of that lost love and the idea of the grief from both parties, but then also, like they're saying, all those flashbacks that we get of like Bruce starting out as Batman, and like that first time when he goes out in just the balaclava and tells them all to lie down and everything, and they're like, no.
I don't know, Mike.
No, I was gonna. I don't. Obviously, because we've both got headphones, so we can't hear each other. Yeah. I was going to say with it as well is I did like the flashbacks and things, and the flash forwards and whatnot, and I found that one of the things I liked most about this is it might be the most vulnerable Batman that I've seen. And there's one line that he says specifically, and it's I didn't count on being happy, I think it is. And it's when he's at their grave, like basically crying because he doesn't want to not stop this thing he's promised them.
In a turmoil, isn't it, of trying to be Batman or trying to like find love, essentially.
Yeah, and it's you don't quite get that in Dark Knight. I find you get that to a degree, and I think in the Burtonverse they don't do romance very well in any of the films. If I'm honest, it's just all very the women are quite bland, except Catwoman, who's completely nuts, and then it's just a bit.
I mean, all of the women are nuts, to be fair.
Well, yeah. True. But whereas in this is, I didn't hugely love Andrea Beaumont, but I didn't hate her. But regardless of how I felt about her, how Bruce was quite vulnerable, it was quite, because it's something that I think, am I right in thinking in the comics and stuff they tackle it a bit more so, his sort of isolation in a bit more.
They have done. I mean, bits and pieces. Like it's one of those things that's come up, and they'll try and tackle it, and then it's sort of fallen apart a little bit in the last 15 so years because he's got so many sidekicks.
Yeah, the Bat family.
He's like, yeah. Basically, they're like, he's like, I'm a lone man. I brood and I stay alone. And they're like, apart from Nightwing and Batgirl and the 4 other Robins I've got kicking about, and these people, and you're like, you're not really alone anymore. You're not this lone vigilante anymore, are you? It doesn't work. But this thing of sort of trying to deal with lost love or balancing becoming Bruce and Batman has been tackled a couple of times. Weirdly, there was a story that Kevin Smith did. He was going to do like a trilogy, and it never got finished. But he did it. There was a character called Onomatopoeia. So every time he did something, he said the sound of it, which was quite cool in comics. He figures out who Batman is, and he starts to date a woman called Silver Sinclair. And Onomatopoeia kills her in front of Bruce. And he is like on that verge of giving up being Batman, similar to this. And then it's sort of like she gets murdered, and it's sort of like, is that going to push him to that next level? And it was never resolved. So they have sort of touched on it, but I feel this film seems to do it weirdly, like more satisfyingly than it's really been tackled in the comics. Because in the comics, they sort of, as you said with this film, they seem to be quite happy to go, well, we have got Batman villains, or there's going to be one, but we're going to put them in the back a little bit for the finale, but we're going to deal with all this sort of like emotional stuff up front. And you sort of, so was it, what was I, 10, 11 when this came out? I was like you, Megan, I was like, are we going to see the Joker in this?
To be fair, I did find, like, I liked the flashbacks, and I liked seeing a different side to Batman, but because I am still fairly new to Batman, I did find this film a bit confusing because I haven't seen any of the animated series. So it kept going back in time, and it kept showing me new characters. And I was like, I literally don't know who any of these people are, because where it's animation as well, it makes it even harder to distinguish who they are because it's animation. Whereas if it's a person, I can obviously clearly see that their face is completely different.
Well, you also then, you've got that kind of part in the back of your mind a little bit, because you did it when we were watching some of the Star Wars films, where you go, oh, you ask a question, and you're like, am I meant to know the answer to this in what I'm watching, or is I meant to know the answer to this because of other stuff in a way? And it's that sort of thing. And a lot of the time I was saying, I don't think you need to know who this person or this person specifically is. It's just they're there kind of for the sake that they're there from this thing. There's not anything else to them in some ways. But
there is bits in this film where I think the flaw of the animation is exactly as you say. They sort of show things, and it's like, that's supposed to be a younger version of a character you've met, and you're sort of going, are you sure? Like, all right, I'll just take that as you're saying that. The one I think that comes up in this film, though, that's quite clear is like, if you haven't seen the animated series, like, you don't have to have seen it, but it helps, is when you see the driver or the gangster, whoever you want to call, whatever he is, that works for the mob, that clearly becomes the Joker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because that's something else that I find confusing with Batman, is that there's so many different, because there's one, like, I mean, the Joker film that we watched before.
With Joaquin Phoenix?
No, the one that was this.
The
Jack Nicholson one.
Yeah.
So his origin story is completely different to the origin story of this Joker, which I find really confusing and stressful, because why are there so many different origin stories when they're the same character?
Okay, so technically, there is no origin story for the Joker. There's been multiple stories that have alluded to one. There's even one recently called Three Jokers, where you found out that the Joker wasn't one person, but three.
Right.
Which was all right. But there's a story that came out in 1989 called The Killing Joke.
That's one I read.
Yeah.
This is one I've read recently that you may have
okay.
seen me. I did the review of Max for it.
Yeah. And it was written by a guy called Alan Moore, and it's a sort of a prestige single book, about 47 pages long. And in that is a story of this sort of like, a bit like the Joaquin Phoenix film. Like he's a failed comedian. He's a bit of a wimp. He's a terrible husband and all this other stuff. And he gets pulled into this sort of mob world. And then when they try to break into Ace Chemicals for I think it's for like a payroll or something, ends up getting dunked in these chemicals and comes out bleached and crazy and becomes the Joker. But even with that, like, it's told in a way that you can go, well, that could be his origin, but it's still full of holes. Like, it doesn't seem to marry up to these other bits. So is it? And so in the actual story, the Joker actually has a line where he says, you're saying these things, and sometimes I remember it this way, and sometimes I remember it this other way. He's like, if I'm going to have a past, I want it to be multiple choice. And so it's always been that way, that like you can read that he was a gangster, or you can read that he was this failed comedian, or you can read that he was this other thing. And it's very much like, as we will get into with The Dark Knight, the Heath Ledger Joker, where every time he faces up to people and tells them where his scars came from on his face, each story is different.
Right, okay, yeah.
And that's the idea. It's like, you never really know where he's come from, but, he probably does. So you'll never get like a definitive origin for the Joker. But like you say, in this, he's supposed to have like a distinctive look. Like he has a distinctive, the way he's drawn and animated is very distinctive. So that first time you see him sat in the car, if you've seen the animated series, you're supposed to go, ooh, I know who that is. If you've not seen it at all, you'd be like, why are they lingering on this one character?
Because there's also a bit where Batman just draws like an orange grin on the gangster's face, and he's like, aha! And I was like, well, who's that meant to be? I'm sorry, but I was like, I don't understand what this is.
No. And then the next scene came out and he sees his big nose, and you're like, wait a minute, I think it's the Joker.
Yeah. That was like Batman 66 levels of deduction, though. That is like, I've drawn some pen on this photograph, and it clearly now cleans up everything. I was like, oh. You have to remember this was for kids, and that's the thing. You sort of like, although the other thing I'd say about we say about Batman's deduction, like they highlight in this that she even calls him the world's greatest detective. Yet the Joker, the Joker knows information Batman doesn't, but he figures out who the Phantasm is before Batman does.
Yeah.
Because Batman thinks it's her dad, and then obviously the Joker knows that he went and killed her dad. So not really the world's greatest detective, because at no point does he ever stop and go, "Where is your dad, by the way?" Like, I get, is he running around as a Phantasm? Can we not just go talk to him? Like, you must be somewhere. So yeah.
I mean, I did also quite like the fight scene things with Joker towards the end, where he gets punched in the face and there's actual blood and his teeth get knocked out. I was like, whoa, that's like...
Oh, yeah, he's got one big gap tooth, hasn't he?
Yeah, I liked that, but there is one thing that kind of did make me think, and it's that, I know it's because it's a cartoon for kids and stuff, but it's always that, oh, Joker's this maniacal guy, he's killing all these people, all this sort of darkness, and he's like, there's a bomb about to go off in 5 minutes time, and it's like, okay,
because he has to get out of there, Mike, obviously.
He just runs and immediately he's out of there in about 20 seconds, and it's like, for God's sake, I know it is, it's in all the
they do it in every film,
well,
don't they? They do it all the time. They're always like, oh, there's a baddie, and the baddie is going to explain the plan for an excessive amount of time, which means that the protagonist has time to figure out how to get rid of the antagonist, blah, blah, blah. And it's always the same thing.
One of the reasons I'm not a big fan, this might be sacrilege, and I'm sorry, but I don't really like 007 films very much, especially the older ones, because they're all, relatively speaking, very, very similar plot lines. And it's like...
Oh, yeah.
When people like them, that's completely fine. But generally, there's only 5 different real, of the old, at least, James Bond films like that.
No, I completely agree.
Is that sort of thing, and it's like, that's how I felt about this.
Just the irony of the Bond film is they address that problem in the third film with Goldfinger, when they like Goldfinger, Bond keeps trying to make Goldfinger talk, and he says to him, "Do you expect me to to talk?" No, he says, "No, I expect you to die." That's it, done. Like, he's not going to manage to sort of give his plan away to Bond, and then the rest of the films do exactly that, and you sort of go, like, from a meta point of view, like, you've addressed this like 3 films ago. Stop doing it. The one thing I would say is this, though, is they don't defuse the bomb. That's the thing. So there's none of that sort of like with 1 second to go, like Batman pulls the plug. Like, no, they let it go. The other thing I like about the fight though is when it's almost like two kaiju, like like almost like Power Ranger style, when they're in the model city and Batman are fighting through it. I think that's so cool. And Joker's sort of riding that the electronic train.
I forgot about that bit.
And he punches those. Batman's like punching those little helicopters. I like those things. Planes. I thought they were cool because I was like, they would actually proper slice you. Like
my thing with those helicopter planes though is, how did they know specifically to target Batman? Because they were specifically going for Batman.
Maybe had some goons with remote controls hidden nearby or something.
Yeah, this is the thing. These are the questions we're never supposed to ask of animated films. But you're right, because there's points where you just go, "I'll just step out of the way." Move. There you go.
I remember Megan, you saying when we were watching this film, one of the big questions you were saying was like, "How she got the power to all the smoke stuff?"
Why? How can she just disappear into thin air?
No,
because she does the smoke thing, and Mike was like, "Well, she's got a smoke thing," and I'm like, "Yeah, I understand that." But that allows her to escape. It doesn't mean that she can disappear into thin air, because she disappears with someone as well.
Joker.
Is it the Joker? Yeah, she disappears with him, and they suddenly just disappear. And I'm just like, how do you have this ability? I don't understand how you've got this magic power to make yourself apparate. Like, it's not Harry Potter.
Because I thought with the smoke, I was like, when initially I was like, okay, well, she kind of said that her dad was rich in some way, that she kind of they had investments or something like that to keep them going. And I thought, well, if you had that kind of time developing a suit that sprays out smoke, that wouldn't be too hard. And then after I gave that explanation, she disappeared. And then Megan was like, well, how'd she do that? I was like, I don't know.
Well, even before that, there's a fight scene in the graveyard where she uses the smoke and someone throws like a spear, like a broken shovel at her.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems to go through her.
Yeah.
And then I'm the same. I was like, even then, I was like, how's she done that? Like,
that's when she's getting chased by the two, like, henchmen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of, the way I kind of made that make sense in my head, even though it is a bit silly, as I was thinking, she looks to have that giant frame of like her dad / Batman, and she's obviously very small. So I thought maybe when they throw at her, she kind of just, because they were aiming at this space really wide, and her body's more like that.
Yeah, but she's wearing a massive like outfit.
Well, you'd think it would get caught in the cape or something, maybe, I suppose. But I'm interested how she carried it.
Yeah,
that sort of mask thing and the giant shoulders, and also managing to run across rooftops with ease.
Yeah,
in basically, and you see Batman hug her. Yeah, you see Batman hug her, and he's like gigantic.
He is massive.
It's like Shrek hugging human Fiona. It's gigantic in size.
It is. I mean, it's quite clever that they make sure that the suit is black and the cape is black for the Phantasm, so they're trying to hide that body shape. But there are definite times if you were to go frame by frame in this film, and I'm never going to do that, but if you were to, I'm sure that you'd pull out a frame and you go, Phantasm's got a male body at this point. Like, the cape's up and there's a definite, Batman body frame in there. But I'm quite fine with that. It's
cartoon.
It makes sense.
It helps because it's a cartoon. I think you've got that degree of suspension of disbelief. Like, there's certain parts where people jump out of windows and they land, and you're like, I know we looked at each other a couple of times when that happened. It's like, okay, like it was like, it's a cartoon. In cartoons, jump physics almost never make.
Was that the film, the one where the car went from one building to the other building?
Oh yeah, they get a bit Fast and Furious. Oh,
yeah. So that was
Yeah, it is. There are those moments where I think stuff like that does work better in cartoons than it does because I was in live action. You watch someone jump out of a building and land really far down, which I'll address in Batman and Robin, and you're like, how on earth did that even occur? But it's one of those things in cartoons. It does sort of work in that way, and I thought it was still a fun film. It was a fun ride. I'm glad it was only an hour 15 though, because there were moments, as kind of Megan alluded to, was said earlier, it was like it could have sped up a little bit. If I'd have kind of, you go and watch the Batman film and you think it's going to be quite actiony to some degree, and although the plot was really interesting, the first half was like,
also Batman's a bit of a creep in this movie as well. Like there's that whole scene where they're out at dinner and he's just sat on the rooftop watching
Reading
them
lips.
and reading their lips. And also there's a scene, well, not a scene, but like a shot where they're eating the dinner and then you can literally see Batman as clear as day just watching them. And Mike was like, how are they not seeing that he's there? He's very clearly there.
He's not being stealthy at this point. No.
He's literally just glaring at them.
So from here, we got a window there. You can see like Dogwater's quite far away, like easy. As soon as the movement happens, you just look over there and you see Batman in that shot, and you're like, he's not that far. And he's like, all the background is like this beige, and he's wearing complete black against. He couldn't stand out more.
And then they talk to each other, and she was like, "Oh, so you've bugged my phone now?" And he was like, "No, I can read lips." I was like, "That's even creepier. I would rather you have bugged her phone."
It would have been better if he'd have just gone, yes.
That is what I did.
That's what I did. Makes more sense. Or even if it had gone, that would have been easier, wouldn't it? Yeah. Think about that.
No, it just followed you around in the rain.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was chucking it down, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe that's the explanation.
Well, it always rains in Gotham. That's the thing as well. This thing, it always rains in Gotham for the most part. The one thing is, though, I don't know, I wanted to ask you, Megan, if it's a 93, it's a kid's film, it's a Batman film, but the instant assumption that it's her dad, who is clearly like a lot older than them 15 years ago, is now the Phantasm. So he's like still 15 years older than Batman, doing all this stuff, jumping over cars, killing these mobsters. And Batman's going, well, it's clearly this old man rather than the young, athletic-looking woman that I'm seeing every day. Like, he's not, I don't know, it just felt to me, I was like, wow. He's not a great detective, and he's a bit of a misogynist, if I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I thought it was the dad as well. And I was like, Mike, I've sussed it. It's the dad. and then it wasn't. I was like, I'm an idiot.
I think Megan just went, as soon as it got revealed to be her, Megan went, oh.
And I was like, oh, okay. It's not the dad.
So you're misogynist?
I'm also misogynist.
He was being a womanizer, though, in this film a bit, wasn't he, at points?
Oh, yeah, there was the bit where he was at the party and there was like that. The one that I compared to Jessica Rabbit, she had like blonde hair that was like covering her face. He had like women round his.
Yeah. Well, that's his face. That's the fake Bruce Wayne, isn't it? That's sort of like, so people don't suspect he's Batman because they're like, well, he's a drunk and a playboy, so he can't really be Batman. But there's a great reaction because he obviously goes into a side room, doesn't he, to get like to wash some or wipe some drink off his face and stuff. And he has a flashback at that point. But then when the flashback ends and Alfred comes in and one of the women sort of is, I don't know, he says like Betty something's in the fish tank. And you just hear this voice going, Bruce! And he's like, ugh. How do I have to keep this up? Ugh. So, yeah.
I wanted to add with something you mentioned earlier with the raining thing. I loved the rain animation. I thought that especially when Bruce was at his mum's grave, a parent's grave, and you see the water running down, and you just because it rained quite a lot in this film, they did it really well. I think the effect when it's just sort of panning the city, you've got that layer of rain, but also when it's done sort of a close up of either Bruce or anything like that, I thought the rain effects were really precise. Like you could see the effort that went into doing each individual sort of drop in a way.
Yeah. Oh, I think the animation in this is great. I love it. I mean, it's like I say, it's got a real texture and like physicality to it, and this is the thing I miss 2D animation, like this sort of like cell drawn animation, and I don't know, it just sort of has a sort of a nostalgia for me that I think it just looks really cool. Like there are frames in this film that I'm like, I'd have that hanging on my wall. Like it just looks awesome. The other thing I'll say is one of the unsung heroes of the Bruce Timm animated era is a woman called Shirley Walker. Sorry, Shirley Walker. She did all the music.
Yeah, okay.
And so she did all the music for the animated series to begin with. And I've got like a full CD set of all the sort of like her musical cues and all the other stuff. It's absolutely phenomenal. But she was basically given the Danny Elfman score and was like, we want something a little bit like this to continue that sort of feel, and she took it and just grew it. And I mean, the opening score for the title music for this is a little bit overly operatic, I think. but it also has some of my favourite musical cues for the Joker. Like there's some sort of nice little nods and little bits and pieces. So I just think the music's really good. And she did a great job in the series, like 3 seasons or whatever she did. It's really cool. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on it, because it sort of falls into the background a little bit, but
especially for me, like I love music, but like especially scores and stuff. But for me, because it's the first time that I'm watching it, I focus more on everything that's going on as opposed to like the extra stuff. Which is a shame, because normally the music has such a big impact that you don't even realize it when you're watching it the first time anyway. You don't realize the true impact of what the music's actually doing.
Yeah, because I was going to say the main reason. Dropping the notepad. I thought that the main reason that I couldn't tell you, like, pick out a specific song and I remember how it goes, but I do specifically remember certain points and the music being very heavy in the right ways emotionally. I think a lot of the emotional impact, like when he's on his parents' grave once again, and the rain's going and you can hear the sound of the rain along with the music playing with it, and as you say, when the Joker comes into it, it goes up again, and I found the music goes with the theme of everything very smoothly. I found there was never in some of the Burton vs. Batman films, there's been the odd time where some music plays and it's a tiny bit jarring, and it's like, oh yes, okay, like the change happens, and I didn't find that with this one at all. It was all very, I think, somber in the right ways.
Yeah. I mean, if you do want to check out some of her music, and if you do like scores, like she's very very good. It's all on YouTube and stuff. You can find a lot of it on there. But the opening to this was made for the film, but the animated series has a very specific intro. Sort of like title sequence. And it's what was actually the title sequence was almost the demo reel. It was the demo reel that was created to prove that this animation style would work and to give you a tone for the show. And they were like, that's brilliant. Make that the opening credits. And so the music on that is really cool. But there's what do they call it when they put like bits of music and it all comes together, and it's sort of like the
reprise almost?
Yeah.
That sort of it's when they do it in Les Miserables,
If it's bits of music throughout the entire thing, a reprise is when they do a second version of it.
Yeah.
But they do it a lot in musicals where they get bits of everything and they put it in one big song together.
That sort of thing. It's on the YouTube. There's this thing. It's about 5-6 minutes long, but it's like snippets of all the different types of music. So it starts with the intro and goes through sort of the Batman theme, and then you get the Joker theme and all those other bits. But her music is great. She's really really cool. So I do recommend checking that out. So, any final thoughts then on Batman: Mask of the Phantasm?
I'd say it's actually quite a good. I would say it's quite good to get an adult into the animated series. I'd say I think if I showed this to a 10 or 12-year-old version of me, I'm not sure how hooked I would be due to the amount of emotional stuff in it, which for me now makes a really good story.
Because it's quite deep, I think, for a kid.
It's like you say, Scott, when you watched it when you were young, and it was just like, oh, okay, the first half an hour of this or 20 minutes is basically Bruce being really depressed about his parents dying, and he's an adult. And it's like when you're a kid, when you see adults sad about certain things, you kind of get it, but with parents dying, that's not something that I would find is in media very often, especially not like when I was a kid. I never really saw any content that mentions that sort of thing very often. It's normally like grandma dying or someone really 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 old, like in Coco and things like that. But I feel like for adults who want that sort of a good Batman show or want something want something new almost, but hasn't seen this yet, I think any Batman fans, it would be really good to use this and go, look, if you like the style, it's a really good showcase of the kind of things you can expect in the show. So I'd say although that may have not been the target audience then, I feel like now the way it's aged, I feel like it would be really good for that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Megan, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I liked it.
There's one thing I noticed, which is there's randomly fencing swords in the Batcave, and I noticed there were fencing swords in the Batcave for a whole shot, and Alfred's putting a sword on.
Meaningless. Doesn't mean anything.
No, it just threw me off a little bit. I was like, what? Also, has Andrea Beaumont, was she created, and the Phantasm, were they created for this, or have they been in other stuff?
So the Phantasm, the Phantasm has come back since. So the Phantasm sort of entered the comics quite recently, actually. and they've done some of the bits around it. But it's sort of based on very, very loosely based on a comic that came out in the mid-'80s by, I forget the guy's name now, who wrote The Crow.
Yes,
film,
yeah.
The original comic. James O'Barr, is it? James O'Barr, I think.
I couldn't tell you his name.
And it's called Batman Year 2.
Oh, it's a sequel to Year 1 then, I presume.
Yes, yeah. And in it, sort of like he tries to track down Joe Chill, the person who killed his parents, and a character comes into it called the Reaper, and he sort of wears a big red outfit, but he's got the same thing on his arm, you know, with the metal the thing with a claw on it and stuff like that. So the Phantasm was very much sort of a take on the Reaper as a character. So they sort of brought it in, but that has a very different. The person in the costume is very, very different. So yeah, they had it. Just the thing to say about the animated series, because it will have an impact again. Up until this point, a lot of the characters didn't really have an origin, as in like villains. Villains didn't really have an origin, and it was around this time that they started to give them an origin. And you know, you say about the Joker gets multiple. But one of the characters that's going to come up again is Mr. Freeze, or Dr. Freeze. And originally, Dr. Freeze was just a baddie who was just cold. That was his thing. You know, that was just it. There was a version of him in the 1966 show who was less puntastic than Arnie's going to be, but that was his thing. It was just he's cold and he uses ice and that's it. The animated series brought in the whole thing with his wife.
Oh, okay.
So there's an episode called Heart of Ice, and it's really good. It won an Emmy. It was the first animated show to win an Emmy.
Oh wow!
It brings in this idea that Freeze, everything he's doing is to try and create a cure for an illness that his wife has got. And so what made him Dr. Freeze was he created a cryogenics system, and it backfired, and he got covered in the stuff that then made him Mr. Freeze. And it's a really sad episode because he's sort of like, you know, he eventually, when you sort of see him locked away in Arkham, he's like, you know, well, who's going to watch out for his wife and all this other stuff? And it's really, again, hits that emotional beat. And then they bring it into Batman and Robin later on, and they do something shit with it, basically. So just so you know, we'll get to it in a minute, but I just wanted to, before we leave the animated series, that backstory for Mr. Freeze was good at one point.
That's amazing.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to jump in right there. This is of the retrospective part 2A. That's right. This is going to be the first part of our second part. So it's sort of part 2, looking at the 3 films I mentioned before, but only the first part of that. Mainly because our conversation went on for quite some time, and there's some great things in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into 2, and I think the next one, probably the Nolan trilogy, will also be split into 2. So this has been released on the Tuesday. Don't usually do that, but don't worry, because you've only got to wait a day or two, because on Thursday the next part will be coming out, and I'll be back with Mike and Megan to talk more Batman. So we will be back on the same Batman channel and all that kind of nonsense. But what I should say is I hope you're enjoying this retrospective, first big retrospective of the year that we have done. But if you want to get in contact, if you want to talk about more about what we've talked about, the first 3 Batman films, Batman 66, Batman 89 and Batman Returns, and of course now we've talked about Mask of the Phantasm. If you want to get in contact and talk about more, you can find me on Twitter and all the usual social medias looking for @20th Century Geek. I can also be emailed directly at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. But don't forget, we also got a website. That's right, we have a website of all this kind of stuff, all the episodes, all the blogs and other posts that we've ever done. That's 20thcenturygeek.com. Go on there and have a look at all the little goodies we've got nestled away. And if you want to support us, there are 2 key ways that you can do that. 3, really. The simplest one, of course, is if you've seen this on social media, retweet it, share it, do what you've got to do, tell your friends about it, and they can all come and enjoy the 20th century goodness. The other one, of course, is you can go onto your podcast catcher, wherever you listen to this podcast. Please go on there and leave a review. Whether you want to leave 5 stars or 1 star, I'm not bothered. Just please go on and leave a review. All feedback is good and welcome, and we appreciate it. But of course, above and beyond all that, if you really want to come and support the show, and other endeavours that we do, I have a Patreon. 20th Century Geek is on Patreon. So that's Patreon/20th Century Geek. For all the podcasting goodness on there. We do a monthly podcast, 30-minute thoughts, where I give my thoughts on a topic for 30 minutes, voted for by the Patreons. And then every quarter, 4 times a year, I get a creator on to come and talk about a project that they are working on, to give us more information about what they're working on, how they work on it, and all those little bits and pieces. It's absolutely fantastic. So go and check that out. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of days.